Hi. In this little initial video for Maya, I just kind of wanted to walk through the interface a bit. When you start working with Maya, I think it's a little overwhelming. It's got a ton of tools all over the place, and as you're working, it's going to be very easy to be kind of overwhelmed. I just clicked into Maya and noticed that there's all these tools running across the top. And you know what's crazy is if I switch these around, if I choose a different mode, you'll notice the tools over here change as well. So, or I should say the menus change. So it can be kind of confusing. So this first little movie is just to kind of walk you around. The first thing I wanted to show you was this pop-up. The pop-up has to do with kind of the type of work you're working in with Maya. So notice as I choose different settings here, we see different tools pop up, and actually we can see some of my menu bar, like my clock, becomes available here. So some of these menus are huge, like Dynamics, it's quite big, and others are smaller. But in any case, you notice this thing appear. Another thing I wanted to point out is that some of the menus here stay the same all the time, and then others will change depending on the menu set that you choose here. So notice as I choose polygons, starting right after assets, we see a new set. So that's the first, I guess, big thing to be aware of, is that these menus stay the same while these will vary. Now, the next thing, you'll notice some of these buttons here. And wouldn't it be great if these buttons would change depending on what we were working in? Well, those are called shelves, and if I pop this little arrow down, I can choose shelf tabs. It does create a little more real estate for me, but it's easier to move between these shelves. So now I can come over and work, and let's say I need to build a cube here. I can come in and generate a polygon right off the bat by putting in a cube at this point. So that's the next thing to be aware of, is that if you don't see shelf tabs, that's kind of a nice item to turn on. The next little bit of interface, which is kind of interesting, is you'll notice that right now we're in a 3D perspective view, and in fact it says persp down at the bottom, so you can be reminded of that. When you're working with that, you have a little cube here that you can click and drag, and that helps you understand this. You also have X, Y, and Z position. X has to do with the width of the object, Z has to do with its depth, and Y has to do with its height. So whenever you're talking about X, Y, Z, you're dealing with width, depth, I'm sorry, in that order it would be width, height, and then depth. In two-dimensional design, we deal with X and Y all the time. Z is the added element here. Now, if you want to work in this perspective view, there's a couple things you can do. If you hold down Option or Alt on the PC and left mouse click, you'll notice you can rotate around in this view. If you hold down Alt or Option and you right mouse click, you'll notice you can zoom in and out of this view. I'm just clicking and dragging while I'm doing this. And then finally, if you hold down Option and you middle mouse button, now for these mighty mice in the labs, I've configured the little ball to be the middle mouse button. If I click down on the little ball, notice that I can now pan around. So you're holding Option in all of these cases, and then you're either doing left to rotate, right to zoom, or middle to pan. Okay, so that's some common stuff. Notice that a panel, this is a panel we're looking at. Panels have their own menu bar here as well. Now, here's for the craziness. If I hold down the space bar, the menus I was just talking about pop up and display here. So notice that the common menu items are in the top, and if I click and hold down, I can choose anything from those items. And then down at the bottom, and it kind of follows my mouse, it shows me whatever view we're currently in. So in this case, it's the animation menu. If if I come down and adjust this, notice that it's now related to the polygon menu. Okay. If you go under display, you can adjust some of these things too. So if I come in, notice right now the heads up display tells us camera names, the view axis, the view cube, and then it also gives us messages. But you can also show other things. For instance, maybe we want to see animation details. That stuff pops in there. And I can get to that menu either that way, or I can pop it open and get to it this way as well. So by holding down spacebar, you're basically just selecting the same things as going up to the menu and pulling down. It's just a fast way of getting there. I'm going to go ahead and slide over, and let's see, all of this stuff looks like it's okay. I'm sorry, I just had a brain fade. Let's see, other menu items to be aware of. When you look in the menu, if you notice anything with a box on it, the convention on the Mac usually is to put a ... by the item if there's going to be a dialog box. But the way that Maya does it, which is kind of cool, is if you choose the tool and you just choose it, it's going to do whatever the default setting is. But if you go over the square here and let go, then it's actually going to open up the options for that particular tool, and then you can go ahead and apply or close it, or press the tool name. If you press the tool name, it actually invokes the tool. Applying allows you to just kind of see what the results are without actually finishing the process. Okay, so we've got that one down. Next step up is, well, what happens if you want to see more detailed interface? So what do I mean by that? Isometric views. If you've ever worked in 3D programs, working in perspective can be kind of confusing. It's hard to know if your item is positioned right dead in the middle or not. So one way to take care of that is to switch over into an isometric view. To do that, you just press the space bar and release it quickly. So rather than pressing and holding, just click and let go, and at that point you go into a 4-view display, kind of like this second button down here. So you could also get to these through these buttons. And in a 4-view display, notice here's my little cube that's been made, and here's the top view, and then here are the side views. Let's see, I'm going to pop this back to perspective. Oh, by the way, if you click and you move over a particular view, it takes you to a zoom on that view. If I just go back over perspective, there it pops that open. Let's go under display, and I'm just going to set the heads up display. I want to let's see, I wanted to take out animation details. There we go. Alright, so we've got this object in here. Over on the right, you see some additional information that's based off of this attributes editor. If I click and let go, notice that I get the widescreen for just editing. So that can be kind of nice. If you're just trying to get editing done and you don't want to do anything else specifically with the object, you can do that. If I want to edit the object, let's quickly go through just a couple of easy edit tools. The first one here is the Move tool. By the way, I first have to click on the object. Notice right now the object is not selected. If I click on it, it highlights. Move tool gives you these little arrows, and I can click and drag these arrows around and it moves the object. And if I click just on the arrow end, it moves the object in one axis only. If I click and drag in the middle part, it moves it around the whole object. Now this is what I'm talking about in terms of getting things just perfectly aligned in perspective. That might look like it's right back in position, and it might be. Let's just turn it around. No, see, editing in perspective is kind of difficult because you think you have it perfectly centered. I move this around and I get it lined up on there, and now I think it's perfectly square. but if I rotate this around, notice it's not. So that's a good reason why working in isometric views is helpful, because I can come over here and set this back and kind of get it back into position. And if I click and drag it in the middle part of this view, notice it doesn't move up or down at all. It just, in this top view, it just moved left and right and forward and back. On the side view here, I can now move it up and down as well. Alright, so that's movement. Let's come back here. The next one that we might deal with is scale. Scale is, well, I should show you rotation first. Rotation. Now let me show you scale, because I think movement is easy. It's just the arrows. Scale, instead of having arrows, you have these little squares. If I click and drag scaling, it scales in one axis if I grab one of those handles. So I can scale things easily that way. Or if I click and drag on the center point, which is this light blue, it scales everything uniformly up and down. Okay, so that's scaling. Now I'm going to zoom out a bit. So again, I'm just holding down Option and right mouse dragging. Now rotation is this middle view. Rotation's kind of funky. You're still working in X, Y, and Z. So notice X, Y, and Z are in red. And then the whole object is kind of in this cube. Or I'm sorry, that's not a cube, but just surrounded by this yellow circle. So if I click and drag on the red one, for example, now I'm pivoting on the X-axis. Again, remember X, here's X here. So it's pivoting, the axis is running this way, so by clicking and dragging, it's pivoting along that axis. Let's see if I can set this back. I set it close. The next rotation, notice here's the Z-axis. If I click and drag on that, now it's pivoting around the Z-axis. Okay, so that takes care of that rotation, and if I click and drag below, there we go, swings around that way. And then finally, if I click and drag on the green one, that's going to be pivoting around the Y-axis. So Y-axis would be like heading. Okay, so Y-axis is heading, somewhat, if we can keep this in mind. X-axis is like banking an airplane. And then Z-axis if we're doing it along the Z side. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me walk back. I should be thinking about this a little differently. Let me zoom around here. So let's get into the front position. I'm just looking up here. So now we have an airplane and it makes a little more sense. So again, Y-axis is still heading. So think of an airplane kind of picking a heading on a map. Okay. Now X-axis, remember it's this way, it's rotating around that axis. We're dealing with pitch, the nose going up or down. We're dealing with pitch. And then finally Z-axis is roll. It goes around the Z-axis, which you're dealing with depth. Now what gets really confusing is when you take this object and you move it, then it's a little harder to remember what's what. But I guess that's kind of the way to start with it. So there's rotation, and again, if I go to isometric view, you'll notice how goofed up this is. Now let's go back to showing those attributes again. One cool thing about the attributes editor is you can come into the attributes editor and you can see how this is set up. So if I wanted to just reset this, just come in, go into the rotate field, set that to 0. There, now the rotation is set back. If I wanted to set it in its origin, which is kind of right in the middle, just go into translate, and this is again X, Y, and Z. And now that I've done that, this object is again perfectly in the middle of the origin without any rotation applied. Some of the scale has been applied. We could set that back down to where it was. Just 1, 1, and 1. There you go. So this is a great way of being able to see what translations there are, or transformation channels you might have. We have movement, which is translation, rotation. So again, they had to put a little X here, Y, and Z, and then scale. They also have shear, but I'm going to leave that alone for right now. You'll notice, as with everything else in Maya, you've got lots of stuff happening here. I went over to the far left, which is information about the object's position. We can get into the shape of the cube, and we can also start to get into all kinds of other things. Shading, that's kind of an interesting one. Right now it's just using this basic shading. I'm going to come under shading on one of these panels and just choose smooth shade all. Let's do that for this cube for perspective view. Zoom in on perspective. By the way, if you press A, it'll fit the image into the window. If I want to change the color of Lambert 1, I'm not going to get into adjusting color for the, making new colors and textures, but let's just say we wanted to adjust Lambert 1. I could click on that. Again, it's inside this attributes editor. Notice there's a color setting here. Let's just shift it over a little bit, drag it up, accept it, and notice that adjusts the color. We could make this shape somewhat transparent. We can do some other things in here as well, but for right now I'm going to leave that alone. So this video basically covered just some real basic concepts about the interface in Maya. The idea that you have menus and that some of them are persistent and then some of them will change depending on what kind of editing you're doing. The concept that you have a shelf, and the shelf can either be available or not. So if you open up Maya and you don't see all of these guys, click this little down arrow and choose shelf tabs, and then you can bounce around and actually get some of these different items. Then we talked about the interface itself, that here's a perspective view, and if I press spacebar it'll give me some isometrics as well as perspective. Each one of these views has its own set of submenus. We can also access menus by holding down the spacebar. So notice that the particular menu items were down at the bottom, and I might have actually turned off showing all the menus. It might only display the current menu. I wonder if I can remember where that's at. I'm sure the tutorial will show you, but let's go in. I'm just trying to see. Let's see, hide selection. No, I'm not going to be able to come up with this right now. I wonder if under Window. No, I'm going to let you find that through the tutorials. Obviously, I'm still in the learning process of Maya 2. I've been using 3D applications since 1991, so the interface idea is very similar. You usually have this isometric and a perspective window. The difference with Maya is that it's just got everything's on steroids. Everything is just so much more. So I think a lot of it is digging around in there and trying to kind of find your way, which the tutorial should help with. By the way, last thing, to get into the tutorials from Maya, just go into the Help menu, slide down, there's this great little thing, Tutorials. Pop that open, and you can start out with an overview. It walks you through these, and then there's a Maya Basics. If we pop this open, that's going to be the tutorial where you're going to build this temple. So that's going to be the project. Okay.